Oh. For a couple of meetings where it's the stamp of the pledge.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome everybody. We're kind of set up sort of formal, but we're gonna make this informal. So it's just a committee meeting. We've got a lot of representatives here from the village. We've got water staff, we got CFS, so we've got Andy here. So this should be a good conversation, good dialogue. Hopefully we can come up with some more information here. Really no decisions tonight, but something just kind of, hash everything out, go through everything that we have in front of us. So Danielle, do you want me to turn it over to you, or do you want?
Yeah, I was just going to, I'm really gonna turn it over to Andy. This will be mostly Andy talking to us, but before we get started, just wanted to let you guys know kind of what to expect tonight and then moving forward. So tonight will be information, a lot of data from Andy. They did the fee study, looked at some our fees, our revenues, expenditures, all of that, and he'll go through that. It's committee of the whole, and I let CFS know this, so no action is taken tonight. We do have a council meeting next Monday, and I have on that agenda, the recommendation to you guys to establish a subcommittee. Because once we have all of this information, I think we'll be better prepared to start looking at an agreement with CFS and go into those negotiations. So tonight, like I said, it's really information, ask questions to Andy or any of the staff here. But otherwise, I'm going to turn it over to Andy. And you guys should have the presentation on your computers. If anybody needs me to go print that, let me know. Lisa's also going to put it on the screen for us too. And it's probably easier to see it right in front of you though. You ready?
Thank you for having me tonight. Andy Campbell. I'm a CPA and registered municipal advisor with Benzinski and Company. Just as some background here, I personally have worked with over 250 communities in the state of Michigan. Our company has worked with over 600, and I advise about 100 or so communities on water and sewer rates on a given basis. Some of them yearly, some of them every 5 years or 10 years, but very extensive background in rate management, rate consulting, and that's what we're here to mostly talk about tonight. Happy to talk about capital improvement funding and debt and cash funding and all that, but it's really going to concentrate on water and sewer user rates and especially on the aspect of ZFS. So just as we are, I think everybody knows this, but we are contracted to represent the village. One of the things that we're looking at in this study is to be good partners to ZFS. So this is not, rate making in the state of Michigan is not a rate calculation where you open a book and you say, this is the answer. So I do like a calculation on Excel or something and saying it kicks out, this is how much I should charge ZFS, or this is how much I should charge all their village ratepayers. It is an art and a science, and there's case laws that you have to comply with as the state of Michigan. The main one is Bolt versus Lansing, which the general directive basically says that you have to be regulatory in nature, not revenue generating. It essentially guides the principles of rate making for the state of Michigan to run the system as a whole in a way where you're not penalizing current customers and just saving a bunch of money unnecessarily, but you're also planning for the future, and you have adequate reserves, and you're doing capital improvements, and you're charging what you need to charge to maintain the system correctly, to also comply with regulation, mainly from the state of Michigan and Eagle. When you add in a large user, and we obviously have dealt with this many times before, that's why we're here tonight. There are other aspects that you have to consider as well. And again, in the state of Michigan, it's very important to know that there are no state laws around this. It's all, I'm trying to stick within case law. In some cases, I don't really like this a lot of times, but you do have to look at what other communities are doing. Although you have to run your system And you have to look at like what your revenue structure is and your expense structure is and how are your customers treated on your system and how would every single business, not just ZFS, but every single business in terms of their having industrial, commercial and residential rate classes, making sure that they are all fair and equitable. You do have to look at, in some cases, like what other communities are doing in the case of big business. So when you talk about a big user, what are some of the other systems doing in terms of how to keep it fair for those businesses when you're looking at the fact that you do want to partner with them, you do want them on the system. The main overwhelming factor is that you want them on the system. They provide a lot of benefits, both in terms of the economy. Obviously, they're paying revenues to the system, but you also want them as a partner in terms of going forward in the future. So you're trying to be fair to them, but you're also trying to be fair to everybody else in the system. And it's all a balancing act, living within case law and financials of how you get there. So tonight, again, just to echo what Danielle said, this is not, there's no action. We're gonna kind of bring initial findings and just talk about what we've seen within the realms. We're trying to keep you within the realms of like what happens in these systems overall. And then ultimately, it will go towards hopefully further positive discussions with ZFS on getting them connected to the system and coming to an agreement that benefits both the village in terms of water and sewer and ZFS, the company. So with that, I'll kind of go through the PowerPoint and kind of highlight some of the key aspects here. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate. Stop me and we can kind of talk through anything that you'd like to talk about, but I'm going to jump right to slide 3, the water fund operating and maintenance. This goes with pages 1 through 4. Actually, I'll give you a little bit more prelude before we go on. This essentially it is now obviously mid-April. Your budget session for the upcoming 25-26 budget season, this is all trying to lay into that. It's good timing for you in terms of the study and in terms of the ZFS discussions that are most likely hopefully going to happen this summer. That's why we don't have to take action tonight. We're looking at trying to figure out a way to get them connected to the system, again, be fair to everybody, and then move forward with your 25-26 budget process this fall. This is all going into that of how do we prepare for the budget process both ways, hopefully with ZFS connecting, but if they don't, what potentially happens to the village system, both water and sewer without ZFS. So we're going to kind of talk through some major numbers, but this is just some selective parts of our analysis to move into hopefully getting near a draft and kind of presenting what we think should be the rates for ZFS coming onto the system. So pages 1 through 4 is the supplement here. The highlight on the PowerPoint is the total water operations and maintenance budget. One of the aspects that is very important to know, and this is just, I'm sure everybody knows this, but ZFS is not connected to the system right now. So this is just your current budget. And you can kind of see overall in the past couple of years that the budget has gone up. So when you start looking at, we're talking about water right now, we'll talk about sewer in a second, but just on the water side, the 2023 actuals without debt, without capital, right now we're just looking at the operations and maintenance aspect. We'll get to the other parts later. When you just look at operations and maintenance, the 2023 actuals were 1.3 million, a little bit over that. The budget for 2025 is 1.9 million, and we are expecting that with ZFS, the budget would approach 2 million. So that test year number is assuming that ZFS does come onto the system, and that assumes that there's some increases in like chemicals and utilities, but realistically, and again, trying to meld this into a system that can serve all, ZFS and the predecessor company has already been connected to your system. Your system has already been built to serve them. So your operations and maintenance, while you will have an increase in operations and maintenance due to more chemicals, more supplies, more maintenance from higher flows, you have already served them before, so we are not anticipating a substantially higher budget. It's about $70,000 more that we're expecting in terms of increase if they do connect to the system. So that's the difference kind of between the two, the budget number and the test year. But you will know that the actuals from 23 to the budget of 25, those have been without ZFS for those years. We did see an increase in the budget, and it has been substantial. This is not unknown, like it's something unexpected in our analysis. We again consulting with as many communities as we do on rates. This is pretty typical. You've seen this because of inflation in materials and supplies and utilities and healthcare, and you've seen this in wages in terms of like trying to keep and maintain people. You want to make sure that you keep your staff and not have constant turnover in utilities. It's very difficult to find people that work in utilities. So you want to keep the people that you have, the good people that you have, and so there's a little bit of that, but it's mostly just normal, like inflation that everybody's seen in their personal life. The municipal aspect of the village is not immune to that. The village also sees the inflation coming from just everyday life getting more expensive over the last few years. So that is the budget increase in full. Again, stop me if you have any questions. I'm going to continue on to people.
Stop.
Yep.
Thank you. Okay, so when you're talking about the operating and the maintenance, with the operating, my assumption, because you just mentioned it, was gonna be with the wages, salary in there as well, is that correct?
Correct. That's
Okay, so would this be stating one of the issues, concerns was having a third person coming on to, or more people coming onto the shift and into employment? So does this consider that person coming on board?
yes.
That's what
Yes.
I want to know.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All right, next slide goes through to the water fund current debt schedule. So this contemplates the current debt payments that the water fund is responsible for. They currently make up $140,000 to $160,000 a year, depending on what you're looking at. These are currently on the system. They're currently you have to pay them whether or not CFS connects. So this is something that's already been built into the budget, or will already be included in the rate projections going forward either way. But this is obviously part of the budget that has to be built in, and we need to bring in that much revenue to pay for the debt. The next slide, capital improvement plan. This supplements with page 5. So there's a lot of capital improvements that are anticipated by the village. I'm happy if you want to talk about this. Obviously, I would lean on the staff to help me if you have any questions about specific line items, but the staff has put together like what essentially needs to happen with the capital improvement plan for the next few years. So this contemplates like for the current year and then the next 6 years. Most of those, if you look at that page 5 supplement, the only one that's really contemplated right now that, again, since we've already been serving ZFS in the past, the only one that really we see on the water side is a additional high service pump for $100,000 to get them before they connect to the system. All the other capital improvements have to happen either way. So this is something that the village is going to be tasked with, of saying, without ZFS, if we don't create a partnership to bring them on, we still have to tackle these other capital improvements. These aren't just because of them coming on, and that's something I think that's very important for the education of the community members, that people have different conceptions about big business coming on. And I think it's very important to be fair to the ratepayers, obviously, on the current system, but also we need to be fair to the business in an aspect to say that there are a lot of costs that are coming to the system no matter what. There's a lot of improvements coming to the system no matter what. If ZFS, and hopefully they do, because I think it will benefit the city financially in the water and sewer fund, not just in terms of the utility funds. I don't want it to seem like they're causing the issue of we got to now do all these capital improvements, and why do we get them to connect if we got to rip up this road and that road. The reality is the water system is in very good condition to have them restart. We need to put in a new high service pump, but we also want them to be partners in the capital improvement plan and have them pay for their equitable share of this capital improvement plan going forward. It is going to be a lot for the village to take on. One of the things that you'll see if you look at the yellow and orange highlights, that are at the very top in 24-25. Essentially, if you look to the right, all those numbers are relatively the same with inflation. And except for the 24-25 numbers, that's because currently right now, this is happening on sewer too. We are having to delay the capital improvement plan and implementation of the capital improvement plan because we do not have enough revenues to execute it. So this is an aspect again of like looking for, it's not just ZFS. It's other partners too. You want to grow the amount of users on the system to maintain the system, but also grow the revenue base to handle these capital improvements. So you gotta be careful about that. You don't wanna like extend out 10 miles in every direction and cause yourself a bunch of issues. But if you were able to fill in the gaps in the village and just add a house here or there, or add a business here or there, if a business restarts inside the village or something, just as an example, you're looking to create additional revenues because that will help you with this capital improvement plan. And just, again, the capital improvement plan has been put on hold in some cases because we're looking at, we don't have enough revenues right now to pay for it. So what are we gonna do with that? So we're gonna figure out financially over the next few months, does, if we can come to an agreement with ZFS, how does that change the analysis? If we can't, and they don't join, what happens with the capital improvement plan and the rates at that point? Next slide is the water fund cash flow. I know our ZFS partners are here, but I do want to, like, this is going to be a little bit awkward, this slide, but I do want to kind of talk about this. So, the water fund, in general, the water fund has been put in a pinch this year. The meter was full, and that means that we did lose revenue for the availability charge out of the plant. Essentially the green and the red on the right hand side, this is just to kind of show you like the village did start like this year with the plan for a balanced budget. The water fund will end up with the cash flow negative because of that. So this is again, like we want ZFS to come back on the system. We want them to pay the availability charges, and you can use the system in terms of the commodity. But we also need to figure out a solution that works for both entities. But right now, the water fund is going to end most likely with the cash flow negative with the meter being pulled. You can kind of look at those numbers to kind of see what it's looking like this year. Some of that was, it's not just like that near the bottom, you'll see total use of cash reserves at 913,000 and change. That's not just the meter, obviously. The city did go into it with, the village did go into it with a plan that you are going to spend some of your reserves to satisfy some of your capital improvement plan. So there was a planned use of reserves for some of the capital, but there's also going to be a little bit more use of the reserves with the meter being pulled. Next slide is user rates with ZFS. So this is a lot of assumptions, and I'm kind of hopefully kind of lay this out as best I can. Please stop me again if you have any questions, but there are a lot, when you talk about businesses coming on, and we, again, dealing with this for other communities now, one of the things you have to be very careful about is you have to know, you have to get the best estimates you can from the company, but you also have to plan for both sides of it as well. So if, for instance, they say that they're going to use 500,000 gallons of water a day, you have to be in a position to provide that if you want to allow them to have that. You also want to be able to provide them, for instance, like 700,000 gallons a day and have them use more water if they can. But you also need to be in a position financially with what happens if they only use 100,000 gallons a day. Are you going to be able to sustain your system and sustain the revenues and expense structure? So this looks at, we looked at this a lot with the working group to make sure that as best we can, we plan for the estimates that they're telling us. What happens if it's low? What happens if it's high? What is there any impact on the system in terms of how much is too much? Because at some point we can't provide them 10 million gallons of water a day. So what's the, and I think if I can speak for staff, and please correct me here, but I think we're in a comfortable position, again, that you have a little bit different situation than most because you've already provided service to them in the past. It's a comfortable position in terms of what they're telling us they're going to potentially use, and we did kind of scenarios of saying, what if it's less, what if it's more, and I think that you're within a comfortable position to look at this rate scenario. Not saying that this is the only rate scenario, this is just something that we'll talk about, and then this will hopefully go to the subcommittee and kind of discussions with ZFS over the past couple months, or next couple months, excuse me. So what does this all say? The 24-25 column on the left-hand side is your current rate structure. You have inside village and outside village rates. If you look at the blue highlight that's below that, this takes into account what is a typical homeowner pay on the system. I have to qualify it to say, like, this is not every single user, obviously, this is just what the state and federal metric is, and thus, it is a valid metric for your village system as well. What does a typical homeowner do, and what is the impact dollar wise? Because when you start talking like rate changes or percentages, they mean different things to different people. So we always try to equate it back to the typical homeowner and like what is a typical resident. The water bill, so again, just talking about the water portion of the bill right now, we'll talk about sewer in a second. The typical homeowner's monthly water bill for an inside village customer is $83.13, which is taking your availability charge of $53.38 and multiplying your consumption charge by 4.5. That is the current monthly bill. If I'll just get kind of to the answer of what we're looking at. If ZFS joined this year and we're looking at rates for 25-26, we are suggesting that the one scenario to pursue would be that the consumption charge for all customers other than ZFS would go up $1 to $7.61. And we'll talk about CFS in a second here, but that would change the typical homeowner's monthly bill by approximately by $4.50, actually, exactly. So $4.50 increase to the monthly bill is contemplated for next year. There's a couple things on here you will notice when what happens to the outside village customers because they disappear. We are suggesting as an aside to this says, again, nothing that we would make this suggestion with or without ZFS. We are suggesting that you move all customers on the water system to the same rate structure. There are positives and negatives to that. I'm happy to have that discussion if you'd like, but essentially, this is to basically treat it as one water system, one sewer system. If you're a customer that has a 5/8 inch meter, you get a 5/8 inch meter charge. If you're a customer that uses 1,000 gallons, you get the current charge of 661 per 1,000 gallons. And it doesn't matter if you live on this side of the road or that side of the road. Our cost is the same to give you the water, and we'd like to move those customers to the same rate structure. Now all the colors on the bottom is kind of why we're here tonight. So let me recap of like when, again, there's no state law that says this is what you have to do with big users on the system. How you treat a large user is very, very different depending on the community. Some communities say, you know, our cost to provide a gallon of water to this business right here, the antique shop, or ZFS is the same theoretically. So why would we give a discount? Some communities say, you know what, like there is a difference between the antique shop, and I'm just seeing them out the window, so nothing against them, but there is a difference between the antique shop and ZFS. So let's look at a bulk rate discount. So sometimes it's called a block, sometimes it's called a multiplier or declining block. Essentially, a lot of the communities in the state of Michigan say, you know what, if you are such a large customer that you're using X amount of gallons of water, then we do think there's economies of scale there, and we do think that we should give you a rate discount on the consumption, the use of the water, and thus the sewer that comes back, to say, we want you on the system, you're an important aspect of the system, and you're using so much of our system that we want to give you a bulk rate. It can go anywhere. What you cannot do, and what I will say, like, obviously this was not talked about in the working group and it will not be discussed, is like, you can't give them a higher rate, in our opinion. It like the 661 you currently have, going higher than that and saying, you know what, this is too taxing on the system, let's charge them more than that. Can't do it. You gotta treat them like a regular customer on the system. However, you can look at saying, if you want to give them a block rate discount of, it's very common to say, if you had this in the past actually too. If you use, like over 50,000 gallons a month or 5,000 gallons a month, well, we can talk about what it looks like, but if you use X amount of gallons per month, then the rate goes down to this. It is important, I will say, that published rate structure is available for all users. It is not just ZFS. So in our opinion, as a rate consultant, if the car wash just started to run cars through there all the time and they hit your block, they would also get the discount. It's important to say, like, our block rate, and anybody that uses the block rate can qualify for the block rate discount if we put that into place. Therefore, you're treating all customers the same. When you look at ZFS, this is it's not necessarily, I mean, I would be more than happy to recommend this. I think a lot of this is too early for an official recommendation, but obviously we're here to talk about a scenario tonight to go into discussions, hopefully with ZFS in the future. But what we did look at is giving ZFS a consumption charge block rate discount of 25%. So they would get a 25% discount on the consumption charge at their consumption rate, at the amount of consumption they use. And then we would essentially set the block to be a reasonable level to where they would hit that block and get the 25% discount. So you can look to see, like, next year's rates. Again, this is just for an example, but the consumption charge for next year could be $761 for anybody that does not hit the block. And then down at the bottom, that brown number would be $571, which is 75% of the $761. So a 25% discount. Essentially, then you would say this is our proposal, and it would just get worked into the billing software. If they hit that block rate, then they get the discount. If they don't, they don't. That's how it typically works, although you can negotiate however you'd like as a village with the company. You will see on here, this is just again to kind of show you how this stuff works, and this is obviously just very parts of a draft analysis at this point. We'll talk about what the finals are, but if you look at the gray boxes, the 182,500, which is on the right hand side, is the assumption we have recently received from CFS in terms of the amount of flow that they expect to pull from the water system. The 91,250 is purely just 50% of that, saying if for some reason it took them a little bit longer to get started, or they didn't pull as much in the first year because they were just getting everything up and running, we want to make sure again that we are financially viable as a village. You're looking at what the company tells you you're going to pull. We're looking at what happens if they pull more, what happens if they pull less, to make sure that you are financially viable on the system. So that just purely kind of sets the table in terms of the analysis we look at to make sure that we're looking at all different scenarios. And well, again, you want to take the company at their word, but you also got to be careful about how we run the fund, and that the fund needs to stand on its own no matter what happens with a large user. Last thing on water on the next slide there, user rates without ZFS. The main thing to note is that we want ZFS on the system. I think you can kind of gather that financially. Now, I'll be careful to say, like, there may be different opinions about politics or about whatever, but financially speaking, you want ZFS on the system. So this goes into the discussion about what happens if we don't get ZFS on the system. We'd have to do more analysis on what rate impact that is, because essentially we'd have to do a lot of discussion with staff to look at this capital improvement plan. Did we just like put it on hold? Are we able to do any of it? It would put us in a real pickle with the capital improvement plan, and thus you'd have to do redo analysis. We'd have to look at what gets delayed, what gets cut, in order to be reasonable to the other rate payers on the system. But I will say, like, so we talked about a $4.50 increase to the monthly bill for a typical homeowner with CFS. Without CFS, it would be much more. So you do have to be careful in terms of like saying like the $4.50 assumes that they come onto the system in the current scenario. But we would have to look at a higher rate increase, delay of capital improvements, cutting the budget, something without CFS coming down. And it could be a combination of those three to limit the rate impact, but we'd have to look at other options there.
So break that down real quick, Andy, the
Yep.
300,000, I guess, is what, like the 260,000 and change for the meter. And then inflationary costs, is that pretty much what that additional is on top of, or to make up for that?
Right.
For the next year, and then obviously you're short on our capital improvements. So anything above, we would want to raise that to implement those improvements that we're trying to do, but we can't fund currently.
Correct, yes. Okay. Any other questions on water? We're gonna switch over to sewer here, so.
Yeah, regarding the water, you know, it's not, I guess, ready to serve or whatever, but other municipalities, I guess, that I've seen. To an extent, the larger scale water users, like you said, the car wash, the restaurant, et cetera.
Mhm.
They kind of offset those costs, but the production rates, the production costs increase due to those larger scale users, right? So how do we offset that? Where, you know, a restaurant is more wear and tear, more chemicals, et cetera, or somebody like CFS that really expounds those, you know, the operational costs, chemical costs, staff costs, that sort of thing. I mean, rather than, I guess, explain how they get set the 25% increase while we're still increasing the cost as well. Where's the offset?
The offset of bringing them on?
Yes, well, to I guess to supplement those increased costs.
Mhm.
What's the balancing act on that? That's what you're recommending, this 75% would cover all those additional costs for the production.
The 75% would cover the increase in the budget plus. I mean, you don't want, I mean, to be perfectly honest, again, like, I want to be fair to the DFS, but also you don't want to bring a customer on, any customer, whether it's the bar, the car wash, and you don't want to bring them on and have them be revenue neutral. You're looking for them to contribute more than the expense to do capital improvements and to maintain the other parts of the system that you have to maintain. It's not just a dollar for dollar, like they cost you $100,000 a year, so you bring in $100,000 a year. You also need to maintain the system as a whole for everybody else and improve the system. So
Because
it's not a dollar for dollar in that
one
sense.
like a residential family would, you know what I mean? A car wash obviously is using, you know, a lot more water, a
Mhm.
restaurant, et cetera. Again, that's higher cost to produce the water, so they should offset it to some extent, shouldn't they? Because they're a larger scale user rather than, oh, you're buying more water, so you get a deal, so you get a discount.
Yeah, I mean, where the discount comes into play is essentially that, I mean, you can kind of see it in the capital improvement plan. With them already being connected to the system in the past, you're not in a position where they're causing you an enormous amount of expense to get them connected and to provide them with water. Your system is already sized to provide them with enough water that they're telling us that they need. We just need to do an additional ice service pump. If we were talking about adding, like doing a big addition to the plant, that's a big, like, which happens a lot with big users. You're talking about borrowing millions of dollars to increase your plant, and thus what happens there if they go out of business or something, or you're not in that position. Your system is already scaled up enough to provide them with the water that they're asking for. So it is similar but different. Like every user essentially is again regulatory in nature, not revenue generating. You're trying to be fair and equitable to every user, but you need to recover the costs of that user, but you also need to gather the revenues needed to maintain the system reserves and maintain the capital improvement plan for the whole system and to operate the system for everybody going forward. So it's like, so for instance, I'm just gonna say like a resident pays $83.13. A resident, this is just completely wild number, but like a resident may cost you like $25 that year based on regular operating and that customer charge. If you put all the expenses back in, it might be $25 that year. The rest of it, it could be 50, it could be 60, I'm just using an example here. The rest of it is to make sure that you have money for a capital improvement plan and everything else. When you look at CFS, when you look at a car wash, when you look at anybody else, it's the same type of approach, it's just different numbers. You're trying to recover the costs that you are incurring from them. But you're also trying to, in a way, spread out the capital improvement plan, spread out the other costs of the system to everybody fairly to make sure that you're running the system in a regulatory nature. The multiplier, to kind of get back to that, is the reason that that's done is typically those big users do, they do share a big burden and the amount of revenue and amount of expenses that they're paying. And a lot of communities choose to take the stance that, like, we would rather have them on the system and rather be a big partner to them, have them be a partner to us and give them a bulk discount than not have them join. So typically it is very typical for a community to go in and say, you know what, we'd like to give you some sort of discount because of the fact that we know of that relationship. You're not causing us the same amount of expenses as you're paying. So we'd like to give you a discount because we want to be partners with you, but we also have to make sure that we're paying for the system and get capital improvement plan and maintain the system going forward. So we can't charge you dollar for dollar what our expenses are and what your revenues are, but we want to be fair to you as well. So.
And does this take into consideration Ryga's cut? I mean, we don't have the direct line to them, it goes through Ryga first, right? So everything else would be tacked on top of what we're selling it, right?
We have no control over Ryga. We can only look at our, what we charge or our fees.
And I mean, and obviously Ryga has to be involved because they're gonna dictate the final number, which CMS could say yay or nay, and that's part of the problem as well. It's not, you know what I mean? We can come to a solution here and say, oh, it works, but we don't know what Ryga has to tack on for
I think that's
their
relevant.
operational costs. Oh, absolutely, because if we come to an agreement with them, we say we can buy you at this, but then Ryga says, oh, we need to charge this amount on top. Because it's running through their lines for their operational costs and maintenance costs, et cetera. We may not even be able to come to an agreement.
It is a 3-party, I mean, it's not the village's responsibility. But it also is going, I mean, that is gonna be primarily led by ZFS, because ZFS will essentially we have to deal with 2 governments here, but. The village will want to be involved in those discussions to say, like, this is what we would charge, and then have Ryga say, this is what we're gonna charge or whatever, and. I mean, obviously, I think ZFS, I can speak for them to say they're aware of that, and they're gonna have to come to an agreement with you and with Ryga and like make sure that the financials work for them, so. It's not just the village of Blissfield to agree with what you're saying, there also is another aspect of this. All right, let's talk about sewer. Similar discussion, but also just a couple differences. So the sewer fund operating and maintenance supplements page 6 through 9, which is the sewer fund budget. The important thing to know here, and there is a different aspect, and this is a very difficult aspect because it's depending on how you see things. So I'm gonna be very vague here, and then I'll kind of talk about what I'm talking about here in a second, but. When you look at, say, pages 6 through 9, the very bottom of page 9, which is up on the screen, is the total operating and maintenance. Again, just the operating and maintenance side on the sewer side. So we're switched to sewer, just the operating and maintenance. The budget for 2023 was just shy of 970,000. The budget for 2025 is just shy of 1.4 million. The reason why the test year goes down in sewer is there was some one-time stuff in 2025 that aren't in the test year going forward, just some one-time costs, but it is important to know that ZFS is going to send you back much less than what they're pulling. So they will be hopefully a partner on the sewer side, but it's not as big of a difference financially because they're not like I should have this off the top of my head, but it was 500,000 gallons per day for water and 150,
Probably 100.
100,000 gallons a day.
20% roughly.
Okay, thank you. So 100,000 gallons per day on sewer. So they're gonna be pulling a lot more and then they'll only send you back what they needed to send back. So it is a different financial picture on the sewer side. It's less impactful. And so this kind of goes to the discussion for budget 25-26. If ZFS does not come out in the water system, we already talked about what happens there. We gotta make some changes. If ZFS does not come on in the sewer system, you still have to make some changes, but it's not as drastic. It's not as not as big of a difference in terms of the financial outlook on the sewer side, but we still need them to be a partner and we still need to plan on what happens if they do join. So we're gonna talk about the current debt schedules here on the next page. So the sewer fund does contribute to 4 debt issues. Previous page.
Sorry.
Thank you. So the 1998 refunding bonds are falling off in the next 3 years. The 2014, which is also contributed to by the water, is falling off in the next 5 years, excuse me. But the sewer fund does have some longer term debt, the 2020 USDA sewer bonds, which go through fiscal year 2060-61. So those are 40-year commitments. The sewer fund does have some commitments on that will be out there for a while, but there's a little bit of budget flexibility coming up here in the next couple of years with the 1998 bonds falling off. If you look at the capital improvement plan, next slide, so that's supplemented by page 10 of the handout. Again, staff did a great job, I think, of putting together a capital improvement plan of what it looks like on the sewer fund. What are the aspects of what we want to do, both with and without CFS. Again, very similar situation, obviously different numbers and different components, but the only one that's ZFS related is in gray. Everything else is related to the system as a whole and targeted as an improvement for the whole system with or without ZFS. If you look at the gray, this is something that purely came from our direction as a rate consultant that I do want to kind of step back and talk about, because it is an important aspect in being a good partner with ZFS. When you start talking about adding customers back to a system, this is purely going off of hindsight for other communities. So one of the things that we talked about in being a rate consultant is, like, we have heard this from a number of different communities, that they've talked about the fact that adding a new customer to the system, which is a high-end user, or restarting a customer to the system, one of the things that has caused, and it's not guaranteed to happen in the village of Blissfield, but one of the things that has caused issues in the past is that you are now restarting a bunch of flow through the pipes that was not there for the past few years. And I equate this to, like, I don't think it's a perfect analogy, but a foreclosed home. Let's say you're doing some showings, you're using a little bit of water here and there, and then a 20-person household moves into the home and starts just using every single appliance, every single thing is now running at full capacity. You're going to have problems with the pipes. And a lot of communities have looked back on this and said, you know what, I wish that we cameraed and lined the pipes that the user is going through, because essentially you went from 0 to 100. And although those pipes were in good shape 5-10 years ago when they were connected to the system, you're now, all those cracks, those little holes, everything is going to, those little deformities in the pipe are now going to be magnified with that much flow coming back. So one of the things that we've looked at is to say, what happens if we camera and line the pipe of the distance that is traveled from where their flow dumps into the village to the plant. This is not to say that we do that. It's to say that this is a recommendation from us to consider, to ask your engineers about, talk to them. I do think it would be prudent to at least camera to see how the condition of the pipe and whether or not you should do anything in terms of patching or lining. But this is from a lot of experience. This has happened to many communities where it's much easier to do that before they hook on than divert the little flow from the rest of the users while you do the camera and lining now, versus trying to do it while they're hooked on. And now you've got, either you're reacting to problems Or you have to divert a lot more flow now because they're also, you can't shut them off. You're having to divert everybody else's flow and ZFS's flow to camera and line the pipe. So that's something that we've learned over time is a very important aspect to at least talk about. So we put it in the analysis to kind of show this is something the village should consider if ZFS comes on. But again, on the capital improvement side, most of the capital improvements are related to the system as a whole. It is not related to just ZFS coming on. Going forward to the cash flow, so they're kind of a similar situation. Again, like the meter aspect is more related to water. The sewer fund is going to use some of its cash reserves this year for planned capital improvements. But overall, the village did adopt a balanced budget on sewer fund, just with the expected use of reserves for some capital. But you still have the same kind of scenario. You do want ZFS on the system, you want them to be a financial partner on the system and a user on the system. But we need to be fair in terms of how we treat them and how we treat other customers, which goes into the next slide of user rates. The current user rates for 24-25, again, now we're switching to the sewer side. The typical homeowner's monthly bill for 24-25 is $88.09. If ZFS did join the system and then we looked at the budget for 25-26, again, just looking at this is a possible scenario. The consumption charge could go up $2. This is again, just a soft recommendation we're looking at right now, which would mean that the typical homeowner's monthly bill would go up $9. So $9 on sewer. Excuse me. And then it was $4.50 on water, so $13.50 total in terms of the total increase to the monthly bill for a typical homeowner. That's just what we're looking at right now as a draft. Again, these are not being considered tonight, but just as a draft. Same type of treatment for ZFS is what we're looking at right now. So if you look at the availability charge, the meter ratios that they would pay for having their 4-inch meters. You look at the consumption charge aspect, you look at the billable flow aspect of the how much they're telling us that they would send back in terms of billable flow, and giving them possibly a block rate discount of 25%. Now, the sewer side does have a different aspect, and I will just kind of talk about this because I think it's very important when you go into a possible subcommittee and obviously the council as a whole and administration aspect of negotiations with CFS. There's the sewer that's coming back, the wastewater that's coming back is from the memo from the company. It's considered non-contact wastewater. Now, I don't know much about this, to be perfectly honest. I'm a financial guy, but I've run into this before, and I will just kind of give you my take on it, and then you can kind of talk amongst the group with ZFS and how they think it should be treated and such. But non-contact wastewater essentially says that it is not touched like human, so there's a difference in the way it should be treated. The problem that I see, and I'm not saying I disagree with them, I want to be very clear about that. It's just that a consumption problem of like how your system is built. It does not go straight to the plant where let's say let's say your plant was on the east side of town and they fed into one side and the village fed into the other, and you had different treatment systems for those. Because you didn't have to treat theirs as much because it's non-contact. We had to treat everybody else's from the village as traditional wastewater. That would be preferable. However, there's dumps into the normal system, goes through a couple miles of pipes with everybody else's flow, combined with everybody else's flow, and makes its way to the wastewater plant. That's the hard part. I don't know. So obviously we've been in these discussions with staff, and I understand where ZFS is coming from. That's hard for me as a rate consultant. I don't know what the answer is there. And I think that that's something that's important to talk about in the negotiations, because it's not coming to a separate part of the plant untouched with everybody else's. And that's the hard part that I'm looking at, is saying you're still, I understand that as it comes out of the plant, it's different, but when it comes to our plant, it's not. And that, we still have to treat it the same way everybody else is when it gets there, because it's all coming to the plant the same way. We have to treat everybody else's flow. I don't know what the answer is, so I personally think that the 25% block rate discount is fair. To say that's addressing some of the non-contact wastewater aspect of it and giving them a volume discount. But that is definitely something that we're gonna have to talk about in the negotiations and the aspect of like, it's how that works, the system setup and what to do about that. User rates without ZFS, so again, it's a similar, but just a different scale. It's obviously, we have to look at, the goal, and just, you can kind of get where I'm coming from on this, hopefully. Over the next few months, like this, we are not going to just submit a study tomorrow and say, here's your answer, goodbye, pay us. It's going to be, we're going to be part of the negotiations as part of our current contract. And get to help you get to a solution, hopefully with ZFS connecting. The goal is that over the next few months, like the village, I can't hold the negotiations for you, but if you want some sort of financials or something, hey, they brought this up, like, what does this do for our financials if we agree to this? Like, more than happy to talk about that in terms of the positives, negatives, and the financials. The goal is to, over the next few months, come to a solution where they connect. If we cannot come to a solution, they do not connect to the system. By budget time later this year, we will have to make substantive changes and talk about it at that point. So the goal is to work with them, come together with agreement, see their sides of the view, see our sides of the view, and see if we can get them out of the system. But changes would have to be made just on a smaller scale on sewer if ZFS did not connect. Next steps, actually talked about this, got a little bit ahead of myself, but this is pretty much what I just talked about. So we are going to continue to be in touch with the village. We're not going to submit a final rate report right now. We're going to kind of talk about what it looks like and hopefully start negotiations with ZFS on, is this financially feasible for them? Is it not? Like, what are their goals in terms of possibly connecting to the system? I think it's a fair point to say what happens with Riga in between us. And hopefully come to a solution here this summer, by this summer. If not, then we'll go into, you'll see me again. I think you'll probably see me again either way, but budget time in the fall, we'll be talking about updates and submitting final reports for the budget time. Questions?
Since I'm flying there, we're not arguing enough on the sewer side today. The $9 increase.
Both systems are underfunded on your current user base to do the capital improvement plans that you would like to do. Both systems are having to delay capital improvement plans. So rate increases are needed no matter what. It's just to what attune with or without ZFS. So.
And we need to be very able to explain to our residents very clearly the A and the B with CFS, without CFS, what rates, how they would adjust regardless. So, I mean, $9 over next year, just for sewer, is a huge concern to me. And so what's compounding that is it, again, we're undercharging now, or ZFS would increase those costs that much to if they came online.
The $9 increase is current system. I mean, that really doesn't, I mean, that works in ZFS, but I mean, again, I'm sure you can tell I'm trying, you have to change your plan, so I don't want to get into like specific numbers, but you would need to increase the rates $9 in the sewer fund for the typical homeowner if they did not join at least that much. The capital improvement plan, everything else is stacking up. The budget has increased. We need more revenues. I will say I would like, if there's any feedback, obviously, please filter it through Danielle. I mean, I'm happy to answer questions or anything. I just like her to be liaison and just filter things to me as she would like, and then. And we will be able to give you numbers on this more. I shy, and I mean, I don't want it to seem like I'm ducking you too much, but I mean, I shy to give you too much info on the numbers right now without some sort of feedback from ZFS and whether or not they're gonna join, whether or not like we can get to an agreement. Hopefully, what we like to do in this situation is talk about the positive aspect of them joining and how they joined, which meant that we didn't have to do this with rates, we only had to do this with rates. And use it as a positive to bring them onto the system effectively. And make sure that everybody's on the same page, that it is not because they're not causing you to do like higher rates or causing a bunch of capital improvements or whatever. But to use it as a positive, saying this is, they're rejoining the system and this is how it's gonna benefit you, other users as well. But we will also talk about the negatives too, if it comes to that, so.
Questions, anyone?
Not at this time. No, thank you, obviously, for all of the information that you have.
Yep.
gathered for us. It's a lot to absorb.
Yep, that's no action tonight, but
Right.
we have a lot to absorb and we'll be able to get any questions and follow, so.
This is the first you've seen of it, or
We got the slides, Danielle sent the slides last week, Friday or Thursday afternoon, so. We looked at the slides and had a few questions that came up on some of the details, but yes, we got it just before the meeting.
any input, questions?
Maybe a little bit of input, I don't know about questions, I guess first I want to just thank everyone for putting the time into this and Danielle and staff and everyone to specifically look. Some of the general looking you're doing, you need to do anyway, but the aspects of looking at our potential large volume, just want to thank everyone for all your time to look at it. I think it's very helpful, made a lot of sense, I think, as you wanted to do, to have a firm and chose Andy to do this. Just a few of my thoughts, I guess, big picture, if you want any feedback. This is just a hard challenge of cost for everyone involved. So if we go back to last September, probably when we first talked. The challenge we have is somewhat like what you're looking at is in the corn processing industry. The cost structures that other plants have where they're located, not anyone's fault, but they don't have typically. This type of cost of water and sewer, so it adds up, it looks like it's about $1.4 million all in, if I'm understanding. The charges right, Andy, if you 55 to 40 million wastewater, so. When we talked in September, our struggle and concern was that if we just looked at the rates that are in place today. It's I think it's within 5%. If you take the rates that you have on the slide, it's probably within 5% of total annual cost we're looking at before. And so that $1.4 million is a really tough thing to cover because other plants don't have those costs and the market is so competitive and it's a commodity business to make the numbers work at that. So, if we just step back big picture, that's what we were optimistic to look at, is whether there was an opportunity for a total cost of the plant that was less than that was also a blessing to the village. So that's what everyone here with Andy's help has to decide for the village on what you can do and what's good for the village and what isn't. So that was the hope, is that cost, that number could be quite a bit lower than the $1.4 million and still be beneficial to the village. So that's for you and Andy to determine. So really, I think the village has to figure out what its cost to serve our account is and what type of rate you're able to come up with, where Andy, you have a number down there, and then we have to just look at it and decide how that fits in with a business plan and go from there. And as we said from before, we're glad to have any discussion, and the more it could be collaborative, the better, to understand and make sure that the information is there. Just overall, it's not good that on the surface it looks like, no, where the rates are for a very large industrial user are where they should be, so we just need to know that then. So we can evaluate for the business on what we should do.
Real quick, the 1.4 million quoted is accurate. So on the full, like the full flow that they're saying in their memo, which is year 2, essentially, that is accurate.
And in terms of the accuracy of the flows, I think, Daniel, I think you or your staff did look, you can look. The volume shouldn't be much different than before, if anything. There's some, very similar, within 5 or 10%, so there's not like a lot of uncertainty that we're gonna use way more or way less if we do a proper restart. It should be similar to what it was in a year that the plant ran steady, so. From what we looked at, we didn't see a year that was above 185 million.
Yeah, I sent you
water.
that
Okay.
history and I, it's all, but I need that to you back when we
Okay.
first started this.
Yeah. So the uncertainty on the volumes, I don't think is too great, even if that was in writing, but. We were, I guess we were trying to look at it from the village's standpoint from the beginning too. On what type of opportunity could be there, and I think and earlier on, we had some discussions, it seemed like from afar outside, not being experts like Andy and your staff that's been living this every day, it just seemed like the incremental costs in your system, if you do our volumes or you don't, seem to be, I think we emailed a little bit, Danielle, it seemed to be in the $500,000 a year range. But there are some other aspects, Andy, that you brought up about some of our assumptions that might not be agreed with, and might be only partially right in terms of like the wastewater plant. What is the cost when you have a lot of that, so much relatively clean water that's diluting, but still going to be pumped around?
That's what, gonna be my question.
Yeah, Steve or, someone in the plant would have to know that, maybe you've already had those discussions, so I think we just look more at the water side. So we were hoping there was a differential there that our contribution wouldn't have to be as much. So the first question is, well, what contribution is there? I think you're saying, Andy, that it would be only about a $300,000 contribution, that the cost to serve might be $1 million. And we're charged $1.4 million. When you say that if we don't join, there's a $300,000 shortfall, but I don't know if it's that simple, so. Yeah, I don't know how much detail you want to get into tonight, but it's just a tough situation we all have, no matter what. What's important is that we understand each other and we have good relationships and figure out what ends up being best for everyone involved.
I guess. I don't know if you can answer this tonight or not, but I'm curious on your take of Andy's take on non-contact wastewater.
Well, I can give you my guess, maybe is how I should put it, because.
And maybe you can't answer that right now, and that's acceptable.
My guess, a little bit of an opinion, is that it is significantly less, because there really aren't solids that have to be dealt with. I don't know if a clarifier is the way to define it for the wastewater side, like the water side, but in a way that I would think that the clean water ends up being dilution, so the water going into the river actually is diluted down when you measure parts per million of anything. It gives you a lot of cushion, I would think. But you have to pump the water around, but there aren't really additional solids having to be removed. And it seems like it helps stay in compliance to the river. But again, I'm not proclaiming to be a water expert. I've learned some here and there as layman's terms from financial side, only trying to understand the operational aspects. So that's my light opinion, I guess, of it, but I don't know if anyone is here from the wastewater plant, is that Nora on here, but.
No, Steve unfortunately had a medical issue, so he couldn't be here.
But hey, you have to be comfortable that you, your staff, Andy, that you have those answers obviously separate of us, you know, we have our viewpoints, but by no means do we wanna come and push and, you know, get pushy like you, of course, it's this way. So I guess they're just loose opinions that I'm sharing.
And obviously there'll be more discussion regarding all of this, so. Thank you.
Do your other plants, I guess, go through municipal plants, both water and sewer? Or are you, do you drop a well and then dump into, do you have some sort of permit from DEQ or whatever that allows you to dump into drainage ditches or reservoirs or?
Yeah,
That's our challenge, is you're going through two municipal resources to make this happen.
right. Yeah, the two other corn processing plants we have, neither of them are using municipal service for water or wastewater. Both of them on the wastewater side, the water goes directly into a river under a permit that's monitored. So,
Are there opportunities to look outside the box to make it happen regardless? Again, we want to look at all options, if you work with Eagle through Michigan, do you not dump? Again, because if that's literally treated water, which is unnecessary to run through your pipes and then go back through as quote wastewater, which like you said, is not technically wastewater, it's probably not even gray water. So again, there's a lot of added costs in there, so are there other opportunities, other ways to pull it off? Do you dump into a drain, do you dump into a ditch? I'm not sure.
right, those are all the things to consider to figure out. Can we come up with something that makes sense and works for everybody?
Because there's no reason to treat that much water, and on either end, regardless, you don't need potable water to go through your pipes, do your processing, you certainly don't need to clean it like a residential waste through the wastewater plant.
Yeah, and Andy's point, it's having to go through, like, I don't know the size of the UV system, it all has to go through no matter what and all that, but.
Yeah, we can't split the pre-treatment, we can't split the sewer side either, so the waste side. Okay.
You mentioned that you don't have any other corn processing facilities that utilize municipal water. Do you have a soybean facility that utilizes municipal water?
So we have two soybean processing plants. And they're different processing technologies. So that process does not use near as much water as corn processing, but on the two that we have. The original plant, which is the smallest, is connected to municipal service. The second one, that's roughly 4 times the size of the first one. Has its own water supply, but wastewater goes to municipal. Yeah, so on the soybean side, it's kind of a mixed bag.
Where are those plants located in?
The original smaller one is in Zeeland, Michigan, and the large one is in Ithaca, Michigan.
Right here, right?
Yeah, both in Michigan.
And you get enough water to run those plants, no problem, from what wells?
Yeah, Ithaca has its own wells right on site, yeah.
Well, again, no decisions tonight. We will potentially create a subcommittee, try to continue working along with you guys, but Brian got or Brian, so so it'll be a process, but again, I think we're all interested. We just need to come up with a solution, yes or no. Andy, we really appreciate your feedback in your process.
And one question, was there consideration taken with the air gas plant running 2 out there after they get fired up on that ethanol plant? The dry ice plant, the air gas plant, is that gonna be fired up in consideration when we did that?
So, go ahead.
Well, the volumes from that plant are not in these
But the sewage
numbers.
part of it, though, is what I'm asking about.
Yeah, that isn't been what we've been looking at, so I don't know if you have volume numbers, between you or the township on, I think we might have some numbers on it, I think the wastewater. If CO2 production commences again, similar to the way before, I think that was about 800,000 gallons a month off the top of my head inbound. I don't know if we had measurements on the
I'd have to-
Does
bound.
it goes back into your guys' lift station, though, is on your plant?
No, I believe that goes today on Cemetery Road into the regular system, and that is one thing I wanted to verify. Yeah, like you brought up, we are in the township, so whatever we come up with, the township has to approve, and we're talking with them on how the relationship would be with them. So that's a given, and they know that we're having these discussions and encourage, we just talk directly to make the communication efficient and so on. One, on the physical side though, technically, our pipes are directly connected to the village system for our processing plant. It doesn't actually go through township pipes. I don't think that really matters for this discussion too much, but there isn't a cost issue, so to speak, with that.
So we would bill them directly, not through Riot.
That could go either way. I just want to make sure that, I don't know if it's that important, but there isn't township piping in between the plant pipe and the village. But the billing is up to the township on whether, I think we suggested everything open book, everyone knows everything, but we would just pay the village directly, and then we pay the township directly, something to them to keep it simpler, but the township decides at the end of the day if they'd rather have it all go through them. But there is an operational work related, is all I guess I was mentioning.
Because they're residential, they double it to pay off their system or whatever their maintenance costs are. So again, I mean, I guess I'm just trying to see. Get everybody clear on, what the increases are. We could come to agreement, but then I guess people know that could break the whole, plan and the whole agreement.
Well, yeah, we're talking about strictly the revenues that go to the village, so on top of that, for our cost structure, we have to figure out also what rate goes to the township.
I guess my last question, Brent, Nora, Steve's not here obviously, but we had some sewer issues from the right lines. We didn't know whether it was L&W or Green Plains, whoever it was. Has that been rectified? Are we solved on it, or we had those issues since that was
That
done?
have to be talked to Steve.
Okay, I mean, that's something else again, because that was really compounded our costs.
Just to clarify, the water, that goes to the Raga meter. The Raga meter is at Gibson Street that ties to your line. That is not the village meter. That line that goes all the way down the railroad track, that is Raga's line.
The wastewater.
No, your water.
Our supply line.
Your supply line hooks on a Raga meter. That's not our meter at Gibson Street. That is Raga's meter. How it reads it.
Well, I thought that our meter was at Silverhorn Highway that you were reading.
But the Raga, it goes to the Raga's meter first. So the one that runs straight to you, that is a Raga meter. And then our water goes from Gibson Street to a Raga meter, and then in front of MAC, the elevator, the other feed, it's a Raga meter.
Yeah,
And
so,
neither one of them are our meter. So once it goes through that meter, it is Raga water.
so the meter that you remove is actually Riga Township meter. That's not the one you read.
No, they get red to come back to him so he can build the ethanol plant branded, but the Raga water starts right at Gibson
So
Street.
you're reading our water meter at Gypsum.
That's Ragus, that's the township's water, yeah. But
Even though we're the only one that's connected to that line.
it goes down there, that was put in for a redundancy line for Great Plains, for Green Plains.
So is the township connected at Silverhorn Highway into that in a different place than we are?
They're all,
Okay,
they're all
yeah.
connected, they're all connected there together.
So you're saying that pipe that runs from Silverhorn Highway to Gypsum is actually Riga's pipe to maintain?
Yes, sir.
Okay,
That was put in by.
So we have no direct feed.
So
yeah, that makes, actually, it does make sense when you say
that was
it.
put in by Gleason's,
That's what.
Yeah.
and that was put in by Green Plains with Raga.
Yeah,
That
they
gave you,
probably,
that gave you a redundancy line, so in case, because what you gotta realize, our system feeds through the system. we wanted to put a transitional main straight to the tower, and then it would fed to you guys. And they didn't want to go with it, so we went back to the system. So basically, that feeds, we have to feed to the system. The only problem with distribution is, so when they have 24-hour, all the time, guaranteed water for the plant.
Yeah, which it needs.
Which
yeah.
it took 24 hours to shut it down. They put a redundancy line down them tracks, and they got, that's where sewers on one side, water's anywhere. Now,
So the township's taking water off that pipe by Silverhorn Highway.
Yep. And then
And they could off of 223, just a little north, two
Yeah.
different
they
places.
take two
Okay,
different places also.
yeah,
That's why we
That's
got one
good to
shut
know.
down right now, the one shut down at MAC.
Yeah.
They're feeding to your guys' farm.
so I was just thinking that
Right.
the trunk between was village, but
No, we do
yeah,
not own
that makes sense.
this one here.
So no matter what, it gets filled through right.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah, that is right with water. We can go over there too if you guys will stop borrowing back shoulder.
So you just read the 1 meter up at Gypsum and then they're reading by Silverhorn Highway to know what we.
They read them and we read them with them just to verify them and bring them back to Brandon. Our guy just goes with them when they read them and verify it. We keep a record, Brandon keeps a record, and then they keep the record at the county.
So do they have a meter by Silverhorn Highway 2 right there? So there's 2 meters, there's ours
And
and
one-
theirs
you got
right
one.
off Silverhorn Highway.
Ragged meters are the one in front of MAC that is closed right now, and the other one is on Gypsum Street. So Ragged's getting all the water right now through Gypsum Street.
But they specifically read their meter at your
We have a
approach, at
meter
your
right
entrance.
Yeah, when Ragged reads them, they read your guys' out there, the ones that you're pulling, the ones that are dangling, and then they read the one back at the air gas and the one that's in the pit on the backside.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
And then wastewater is coming all the way up and dumping in on off Gypsum, right?
Your wastewater comes right, your guys is from the plant, goes straight
Yeah.
down, or goes straight down and it dumps in at the, right there by the Blissfield Market. And the railroad tracks. You come on the other side of the railroad tracks, one water's on one side.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that's good to know.
Anybody else? Work on a committee maybe next week, then we'll see how we move forward. All right, appreciate everybody's time, actually. Danielle, any further?
I did not have anything further, no.
No. All right, now we'll go ahead and adjourn.